Welcome, everyone. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most iconic and influential novels of the 20th century, On the Road by Jack Kerouac. This book, first published in 1957, is often considered the defining work of the Beat Generation, a group of writers and artists who, in the post-World War II era, rebelled against conventional society, seeking personal and creative freedom. On the Road captures that spirit perfectly. It follows the crisscrossing journeys of a young writer, Sal Paradise, Kerouac's fictional counterpart, and his charismatic friend, Dean Moriarty, as they roam the highways and small towns of mid-century America. In this comprehensive, spoiler-inclusive summary, we'll explore the novel's major plot points, delve into its central characters, unpack its themes, and immerse ourselves in the vibrant, restless atmosphere that Kerouac so powerfully evokes. By the end, you'll have a thorough understanding of everything this wild, vivid, and deeply emotional road trip has to offer. Our story begins from the perspective of Sal Paradise, the novel's narrator. He's a young writer living in New York City, recuperating from a recent divorce and facing a sense of existential drift. It's the late 1940s. America is still buzzing from its victory in World War II, but there's an undercurrent of restlessness and discontent among certain young intellectuals and artists. Sal feels this restlessness acutely. He yearns for some great adventure, some experience that will propel him beyond his ordinary routine and stale relationships. Enter Dean Moriarty, a figure who almost immediately captures Sal's imagination. Dean, newly arrived in New York, is brimming with energy. He grew up largely on the road, spending time in reform schools and around the West. He's reckless, charming, and exudes an undeniable magnetism. From Sal's eyes, Dean seems to embody a frantic kind of freedom, a hunger for life that matches the breathless pace of the jazz music they both love. Dean is also deeply curious, devouring books and philosophical ideas, yet unable to constrain himself to a single line of thought or conventional moral code. He is simultaneously childlike in his enthusiasm and cunning in his ability to manipulate situations to his advantage. Carlo Marx, another friend in New York, loosely based on poet Allen Ginsberg, enters the scene as well. Carlo's presence is significant because he and Dean share intense, marathon conversations about the meaning of life, poetry, and the nature of existence. These late-night sessions fascinate Sal, who listens to them passionately debate and sees in Dean a spark of mania that echoes something raw and untamed within himself. Sal, who's more introspective, is hypnotized by Dean's unpredictability. He finds himself drawn to Dean's dreams of crisscrossing the country, meeting new people, working odd jobs, and living spontaneously. Feeling an irresistible pull toward the open road, Sal finally decides to follow Dean's lead, or more accurately, to follow Dean's example, because Dean actually leaves for Denver first. Sal sets off on his own from New York in July 1947 with a few dollars in his pocket. His plan is grand and open-ended. He'll hitchhike west, see new landscapes, and eventually join Dean in Denver. This trip marks the beginning of Sal's transformation. Even from the start, it's clear that the road itself is the real protagonist, an ever-changing landscape that Sal can't quite pin down but longs to absorb completely. Sal's initial trek west becomes a patchwork of tiny adventures and moments of existential reflection. He hitchhikes through New Jersey, struggling with rides at first, then getting into a series of trucks, meeting eccentric travelers, and bathing in the rawness of America's highways. He has very little money and often has to sleep on benches or in cheap motels. For Sal, each mile is laced with excitement. He meets migrant workers, ex-convicts, and colorful hitchhikers on the same route, each carrying their own stories and ambitions. This communal sense of drift, of shared restlessness, awakens something in Sal, a spiritual camaraderie among those who roam. Eventually, Sal makes it to Chicago, where he's fascinated by the city's dynamism and its jazz clubs. He enjoys the bustling nightlife, but remains haunted by the road that continues stretching out beyond the horizon. Soon he leaves for Des Moines, then finally on to Denver, where he reunites with Dean, Carlo Marx, and several other friends, including Chad King and Tim Gray. Denver becomes a sort of temporary home base for the group. By now, Dean has become involved with two women simultaneously, his new wife, Camille, and his teenage ex-wife, Mary Lou. This triangle sets the stage for much of the novel's emotional tension. Dean's chaotic personal life underscores his inability or unwillingness to be consistent or reliable. During this time in Denver, Sal revels in the circle of bohemian friends who debate poetry, play jazz records, and indulge in philosophical banter. Yet, he also feels moments of alienation when confronted with the unrelenting intensity of Dean's lifestyle. Dean is perpetually on the move. He'll rush from Carlo Marx's place to Mary Lou, then speed across town to see Camille, only to burst back again for more all-night discussions. Sal, both exhilarated and somewhat worn down, decides at one point to strike off on his own. He visits the mountains nearby, attempting to find some tranquility away from Dean's whirlwind. But the lure of Dean's energy and the vibrant Denver scene pulls him back. After some time in Denver, Sal, Dean, and Mary Lou plan to drive to San Francisco, hoping to find new possibilities. The trio's road trip is marked by comedic episodes: Dean's frantic driving, Mary Lou's flirtations with Sal, the group's near total lack of money, and more profound moments, like watching the sun rise over desert landscapes that seem to promise boundless freedom. Kerouac paints these vistas with reverence, emphasizing how the American West stirs an almost mystical awe in Sal's heart. Upon arriving in San Francisco, Sal is confronted with new realities. They move into a small apartment, but tensions run high. Dean's relationship with Mary Lou is fraught, and it becomes clear that Dean's reckless behavior often leaves him unmoored. Sal, too, is running out of money fast. Mary Lou eventually leaves both men for another traveler. Dean reconnects with Camille, with whom he has a child. Meanwhile, Sal grows disenchanted with city life. Disillusioned, broke, and feeling distant from Dean's ever more confusing entanglements, Sal decides to head back east on his own. Back on a bus to New York, Sal reflects on his journey. Though it was exhilarating, he returns exhausted, uncertain, and somewhat heartbroken, as though the road had promised something it couldn't fully deliver. In New York, he tries to settle into a more stable life. He stays with relatives in Long Island, works on his writing, and contemplates the possibility of returning to college. For a while, he recovers from the breakneck pace of his travels, remembering them fondly but also with a tinge of sadness. Yet Dean is never far from Sal's thoughts. Letters from Dean arrive sporadically, and each one is filled with chaotic energy. Dean is scrounging for work, forging new relationships, returning to old ones, and generally living on the edge of survival. Sal can't help but be pulled back into Dean's orbit. He's torn between a desire for stability and the persistent urge to embark on another great trek, this time, perhaps, better prepared or with clearer goals. Eventually, Dean reappears in New York unannounced, with Mary Lou once again by his side. He's dead set on convincing Sal to journey with him down to New Orleans and then out to the West once more. Although Sal initially hesitates, the allure of the road and the emotional, almost fraternal bond he feels with Dean wins out. Before long, they're off again, leaving behind the routines and constraints of New York for another shot at unbridled freedom. Their route takes them first to Virginia, where they drop by the family home of Sal's acquaintances, and then down to New Orleans to visit Old Bull Lee, a mentor figure of sorts, inspired by William S. Burroughs. Old Bull Lee is a sharp, cynical intellectual who experiments with drugs and looks upon Dean's perpetual motion with both amusement and concern. Through Old Bull Lee's commentary, we see a more critical perspective on Dean. While Sal idolizes Dean's spontaneity and thirst for life, Old Bull Lee sees recklessness, self-destructiveness, and manipulation. Nevertheless, Sal remains captivated, clinging to the belief that theirs. Leaving New Orleans, Sal and Dean continue their journey, traveling to places like Texas and then north again. At each stop, the two men drift into enclaves of fellow travelers, bohemians, bar patrons, and strangers who offer fleeting friendship or short-term comfort. The concept of a state of transcendent excitement and insight recurs throughout these jaunts. Dean, especially, believes that in certain moments, listening to a roaring saxophone solo at a packed jazz club or feeling the wind whip across the hood of a speeding car, he touches the pulse of life itself. These sections of the novel capture the essence of Sal's and Dean's nights out in jazz clubs, especially in places like Chicago, New York, or any city along the road that has a lively African-American music scene. Kerouac's prose crackles with energy as he describes their communion with the bebop rhythms and the intense improvisations that mirror Dean's own frantic, improvisational approach to living. For Sal, jazz resonates with the same spirit that pushes him onto the highway. It's spontaneous, it's raw, and it's always in motion. However, around every corner, real-world responsibilities lurk. Dean struggles to hold down jobs for more than a few days. He owes child support to Camille, has unresolved ties to Mary Lou, and is constantly low on cash. Sal, meanwhile, sometimes bristles at how Dean's impulsiveness can border on disregard for basic decency, such as abandoning friends who are depending on him or lying about finances. Yet Sal can't resist the sense that Dean is chasing an almost spiritual epiphany. In a country that's swiftly conforming to suburban ideals of marriage, steady jobs, and neat little houses, Dean stands out as a radical prophet of motion, desire, and personal freedom. The novel structure can feel cyclical. Sal and Dean keep separating and reuniting, taking new trips, encountering new sets of challenges, and returning to old patterns. Eventually, Dean arrives in New York once again, newly married to Inez, and the two make yet another attempt to drive cross-country. This time, though, the emotional stakes feel higher. Sal is becoming more introspective. He's not the same naive dreamer he was at the start. He's begun to see the cracks in Dean's persona, his unreliability, his tendency to burn through people's goodwill, and the pain he can inflict on the women who love him. Sal still admires Dean's vitality, but he's also more wary. While on one of these cross-country treks, Sal falls gravely ill in Denver. He experiences a severe fever that leaves him bedridden for days. Dean, preoccupied or perhaps unable to handle such a crisis, essentially abandons Sal in a boarding house, disappearing to chase his own impulses. When he finally returns, Sal is shaken. His trust in Dean is rattled, and he recognizes that Dean's worldview, it's all about the moment, man, can feel callous in the face of real need. Despite the fracture, once Sal recovers, they decide to continue west. Deep down, Sal still harbors hope that these journeys can yield some ultimate insight or revelation. Their travels bring them once more to San Francisco, then down to Los Angeles. And on a whim, Dean proposes the most outlandish idea yet, heading south of the border into Mexico, chasing an even more exotic vision of unfettered living. Sal, intrigued, agrees, feeling that maybe this foreign land, with its different rhythms and cultural landscapes, could offer the epiphany that has eluded them so far. Off they go, crossing into Mexico with little money, minimal plans, and an abiding optimism that something extraordinary awaits just beyond the next horizon. This Mexican odyssey marks the final major journey in the novel. Once they enter Mexico, Sal and Dean become enamored with the vast, sun-scorched panoramas, the small, dusty towns, and the unpaved roads that lead deeper into what they see as a mystical heart of the country. For them, Mexico is a place removed from the constraints of American society. No more highways dotted with chain restaurants or neon signs. Instead, there are small cantinas, lively fiestas, and a sense of timelessness. Sal, in particular, feels that Mexico represents a raw authenticity that might unite him and Dean with something greater than themselves. The pair pick up a young hitchhiker who guides them to his hometown, and they pass through villages where local children run after their car. They revel in cheap drinks and local marijuana, drifting through days and nights in a haze of excitement. Sal imagines they're on the brink of discovering life's deepest secrets. Yet as they plunge further into rural Mexico, reality, once again, intrudes. Road conditions worsen, their car breaks down, and Sal is stricken with a severe bout of dysentery that leaves him feverish and delirious. It's one of the novel's most pivotal emotional moments. Sal, physically and mentally shattered, needs Dean's help more than ever. But as Sal's sickness worsens, Dean abandons him, heading back to the United States. To some extent, Dean's departure is driven by his own urgent personal issues. He must attend to his complicated family situation back home. Yet in Sal's eyes, the betrayal is stark and final. All the illusions about Dean's absolute brotherhood and loyalty come crashing down. This is the critical turning point of Sal's emotional arc. The moment he realizes that the road, and the man who symbolizes it, cannot fully shield him from life's pain, mortality, and the responsibilities that come with genuine human connection. Sal recuperates in Mexico City with the help of locals and eventually makes his way back to the States alone. The dream of some grand spiritual epiphany in Mexico dissolves into the reality of Dean's limitations and Sal's vulnerability. Symbolically, the trip to Mexico stands as the culmination of their restless wanderings, a literal crossing of borders in search of transcendence, only to be met with physical and emotional collapse. Once back in the United States, Sal wrestles with a mix of heartbreak and acceptance. He recognizes that his friendship with Dean has changed forever. Though they will remain connected by the experiences they shared on the road, Sal cannot ignore the repeated betrayals and the emotional toll of Dean's lifestyle. Sal returns to New York and, for a while, attempts to settle into a calmer routine. He begins dating, nurtures new friendships, and continues writing, channeling the swirl of memories from his road adventures into reflective prose. Dean, meanwhile, wanders in and out of Sal's life. By the end of the novel, Dean shows up in New York one last time, hoping to reconnect and perhaps rekindle the old magic. However, Sal is preparing to go out for a night on the town with his girlfriend, to whom he will soon become engaged, and another couple. Sal, aware that Dean is on the outskirts, disheveled, possibly looking for a ride, makes the decision to go on without him. In that moment, we see the bittersweet closure to their era of shared wanderlust. The man who once ignited Sal's passion for the open road now seems like a distant figure from a bygone chapter. The final lines of the novel capture Sal reflecting on Dean and the roads they traveled, on the immensity of America, and on the ephemeral intensity of their bond. It's a gentle, wistful ending, tinged with nostalgia, but also colored by a sober understanding that real life cannot remain in constant motion. In a sense, Sal's choice to leave Dean behind at the end symbolizes his own steps toward a different kind of maturity, one that encompasses love, commitment, and personal responsibility alongside his memories of the blazing freedom he once found out on the road. Character analysis: the Beat Duo and their circle. Sal Paradise. Sal is the novel's narrator and our window into every event. He begins as a somewhat timid dreamer, recovering from a failed marriage, and ends with a deeper, more introspective perspective on life. While he idolizes Dean for his vitality, Sal's journey is also about reconciling the excitement of possibility with the necessity of stability and compassion. Over the course of the book, Sal matures, but he never fully abandons the romantic pull of the road. He embodies a classic tension in American literature, the individual torn between the call of exploration and the comfort of home. Dean Moriarty. Dean is the larger-than-life figure at the novel's center. Charismatic, impassioned, and unpredictable, he inspires both awe and frustration. His ceaseless quest for Wanderlust, that elusive, heightened experience of life's immediacy, drives most of the novel's action. Yet, Dean's inability to take responsibility for those around him, especially the women in his life, illustrates the darker side of his free-spiritedness. By the novel's end, Dean stands as both an emblem of ultimate freedom and a tragic figure, someone whose brilliance is overshadowed by his incapacity to truly care for others in their moments of need. Carlo Marx. Carlo is the intellectual poet of the group, representing the more introspective aspects of the Beat generation. His late-night sessions with Dean shape the philosophical heart of the novel, discussions that revolve around time, existence, and the role of an artist in a disenchanted world. Carlo's observational, sometimes critical stance complements Sal's admiring perspective, providing a more analytical lens through which to view Dean's mania. Mary Lou and Camille. Mary Lou, Dean's teenage ex-wife, embodies the allure of youthful beauty and carefree living, but she quickly grows disillusioned with Dean's behavior. Despite moments of genuine affection, Dean's attention to her is fleeting and self-centered. Camille, the more stable and legitimate wife, anchors Dean's domestic life in San Francisco. She bears his child, deals with his absences, and endures his endless betrayals. Both women highlight Dean's conflicting desires for both conventional love and unrestrained freedom, and their pain is a sobering reminder of the costs of that freedom. Old Bully. In New Orleans, Old Bully acts as a detached commentator, an older figure who sees both the promise and peril in Dean's lifestyle. With his own eccentricities, including drug use and conspiratorial theories, he's hardly a paragon of normalcy, but he does voice concerns that resonate with Sal's growing doubts. In many ways, Old Bully shows Sal a roadmap for what a life of constant indulgence in impulses and vices might look like in the longer run. Intellectually rich, but also dangerously aimless. One of the overarching themes in On the Road is the search for freedom. Freedom from social conventions, from economic constraints, from psychological baggage, and from the stifling predictability of day-to-day life. Sal and Dean's repeated departures and arrivals epitomize this yearning. Yet, the novel also highlights the limitations of such freedom. Dean's chaotic personal life demonstrates that total freedom can harm others if it isn't balanced by empathy or responsibility. Another pivotal theme is the quest for identity. Sal narrates his own transformation from a passive observer to a more discerning individual who must decide how much of Dean's philosophy to adopt. This identity crisis plays out against the backdrop of America itself, which Kerouac describes as a vast patchwork of subcultures, landscapes, and social classes. The road trip becomes a metaphor for an existential journey. By traveling physically, Sal, and by extension, Kerouac, hopes to discover deeper truths about himself and his world. The concept of IT, which Dean constantly pursues, points to the spiritual or ecstatic dimension of beat culture. IT could be that moment of jazz improvisation that transcends ordinary perception, or the bonding that happens in the delirium of a night-long conversation, or the wordless communion with nature while speeding across the desert at dawn. This pursuit of heightened experience is central to Dean's character, but Sal ultimately realizes that these peaks can't be sustained indefinitely. Life, inevitably, demands rest, reflection, and human connections that run deeper than the next thrill. The physical backdrop of On the Road spans almost the entire United States, from the cramped apartments of New York City to the wide-open plains of the Midwest, the towering Rockies, and the buzzing streets of San Francisco. Through Sal's eyes, we witness a post-war America in flux. Highways connecting once isolated regions, cars becoming a symbol of modern freedom, and a booming economy that fosters both suburban comfort and an undercurrent of discontent among restless youth. Kerouac's descriptions of roadside diners, gas stations, Skid Row hotels, and jazz clubs evoke the era's atmosphere with cinematic clarity. He captures both the exhilaration of crossing a new state line and the grit of hustling for gas money. When Sal and Dean reach Mexico, the landscape shifts dramatically. The roads become less predictable, the language changes, and the cultural rhythms differ. This shift amplifies their sense of adventure, but also accelerates their confrontation with the harsh realities of physical ailment and resource scarcity. Throughout the novel, the road itself is the ultimate symbol, a thread connecting all these distinct places. It stands for possibility, for the promise that one can remake one's life by simply heading out in a new direction. Yet the road is also unforgiving, demanding resilience, cunning, and at times a willingness to compromise morals. It's a stage on which Sal and Dean enact their yearning for the extraordinary, but it's also a place that reveals their vulnerabilities. If there's one feeling that underscores On the Road, it's yearning for meaning, for connection, for adventure. Sal's narration brims with longing for the days of pure elation he experiences with Dean, cruising along empty highways or soaking in the electric energy of a jazz performance. There are moments when they share a profound unity, a bond that seems to transcend time. Those instances feel almost sacred to Sal, illuminating what it might be like to live purely in the moment. Over time, though, the novel transitions from naive excitement to a more melancholic undercurrent. The repeated disappointments, money problems, personal betrayals, physical illnesses, chip away at Sal's idealism. Dean's behavior, while initially inspiring, becomes a source of heartbreak. There's a powerful sense that the beat in Beat Generation refers not only to the beat of jazz rhythms, but also to a sense of being beaten down by life's inevitable burdens. In the final pages, the heartbreak is palpable. Sal's final note about Dean. Watching Dean recede into the distance, left alone in the streets, reflects a deep sadness at the dissolution of their once unbreakable camaraderie. Yet Kerouac tempers this sadness with a gentle acceptance, underscoring that life moves on, roads are never-ending, and each traveler must eventually find his own way. Hoff, published in 1957, On the Road was inspired by Jack Kerouac's real-life journeys in the late 1940s. The novel's impact on American culture was immediate and long-lasting. It resonated with a new generation of readers who found in Sal and Dean's escapades a reflection of their own disaffection with societal norms. The book helped define the Beat generation alongside writers like Allen Ginsberg and William S. Burroughs, figures who appear in fictionalized form within the novel. Today, reading On the Road can feel like stepping into a mythic past. Gas was cheap, hitchhiking was feasible, and the highways promised a romantic encounter with the unknown. But its core message, about the tension between freedom and responsibility, the hunger for an authentic life, and the sometimes painful realities of forging deep human bonds, continues to resonate. In many ways, Sal's final acceptance of Dean's flaws marks the end of a great adventure and the beginning of a more nuanced understanding of freedom. For modern readers, or viewers in this case, the novel reminds us that the open road symbolizes more than physical travel. It represents the courage to explore our deepest desires and confront the limitations that make us human. Kerouac's prose, rich with spontaneous energy, conjures a living tapestry of mid-century America, a land of neon signs, dusty truck stops, all-night jazz joints, and restless souls seeking something just beyond the horizon. In summarizing On the Road, we've traced Sal Paradise's transformation from an eager dreamer to a somewhat chastened observer, aware that the road's allure is inseparable from the heartbreak it can inflict. We've come to see Dean Moriarty as both muse and cautionary tale, an embodiment of raw, incandescent life who nonetheless falters when real empathy is required. We've glimpsed a cast of beats: Carlo Marx, Old Bull Lee, Mary Lou, and Camille, who form a shifting constellation around Sal and Dean's star-like momentum, each contributing their own perspective on what it means to reject convention and pursue truth in a rapidly changing world. Ultimately, On the Road is a celebration of motion, discovery, and the quest for transcendent moments. Yet it's also a sobering narrative about the costs of unbounded freedom. By the closing chapters, Sal Paradise has learned that the euphoria of the open highway can't last forever, that it must be balanced by the responsibilities and emotional ties that make life meaningful. The final image of Dean drifting away in the darkness, while Sal heads off with his new companions, crystallizes the bittersweet passage from youth into a maturity tempered by memory. Kerouac's final lines, meditating on America's vast landscape and the shared dreams of its drifters, offer a parting reflection on what it means to be alive, longing, and perpetually in motion. And there you have it, the full arc of On the Road. Sal Paradise's repeated journeys west and south, the kaleidoscope of strangers and friends encountered, the jazz and poetry that color the nights, and the inner growth spurred by both wonder and disappointment. If you've never read the novel, now you have the entire story, including its ending. But if you do decide to experience Kerouac's text firsthand, you'll discover a lyrical style that pulses with the same restless heartbeat as its characters. For many readers, the book is more than just a story. It's an anthem for wanderers, a testament to the spiritual possibilities of a life unconfined. Yet it's also a cautionary tale, reminding us that in the pursuit of absolute liberty, one might risk losing track of the very human connections that make that freedom worthwhile. Either way, On the Road remains a defining literary journey, one that continues to inspire, provoke, and challenge anyone who has ever looked down a long highway at dusk and wondered where it might lead. Safe travels, and thanks for joining me on this deep dive into one of literature's most exhilarating road trips.